There is nowhere quite like the Naval Weapons Station in Seal Beach. Its proximity to Huntington Beach makes it extra special for HB locals, many of whom are deeply interested in what lives just over the border.
Part of protecting our country isn't being aggressive and going out and harming anyone, it's having the capability to defend. The mission and that piece of real estate are vital to our national defense.
I'm Chris Epting. History excites me, especially history that's waiting to be uncovered. I feel like a detective sometimes, sifting through clues, chasing down leads, and examining evidence. That's why I've written so many books about it. When you discover an untold story, it sparks the imagination, it connects you to the past, and sometimes it even helps you see into the future. Welcome to Hidden Huntington Beach.
A lot of people do not realize that logistics, of which foodstuffs, medical, and things that go kaboom, called ordnance, are very important to move to different operating theaters. These are things that, in theory, could explode.
For those in Huntington Beach and surrounding areas who are, like myself, very curious about the naval station here, talk about the history.
Back in the day, in the 1930s, there was like two Navy bases along the Pacific coast here. There was Long Beach, and then it was down south in San Diego.
Right.
And they decided, hey, we need a place to store the weapons for these two fleets. You don't generally, especially at that time, want to put the weapons right next to where your ships are, so they wanted to figure out a place maybe somewhere in between those two locations.
Right.
And so they determined that Anaheim Bay would be the best location out of those options for a naval weapons station. This was in the 1930s, and nothing happened. World War II started, and suddenly everyone was like, boy, we better get a weapons station in place here. And so they started buying up local properties in this area in 1943, and then started construction in 1944. The base was formally commissioned in March of 1944, and the base started operations towards the end of 1944.
Greg, we're here obviously at the Naval Weapons Ammunition Depot, and this is like a depot. It's like a train station. I mean,
That's
this
right.
is incredible. I had no idea this was back here. This, to me, is truly hidden history, and there's a number of these structures down the way. Describe what this is all about right here.
So one of the primary missions of the Naval Ammunition Depot at the time was to load and unload Navy ships with munitions. Ships would get loaded with munitions, they'd go out, fight the war in the Pacific in the 40s, they'd come back and bring back whatever munitions they hadn't used, and we'd take them off the ships. At the time, munitions were far less safe than they are today, and so you always wanted to make sure that none of the munitions had any issues with them before you stored them into a bunker. So this was always the first stop here at this location. It's called the segregation yard or segregation depot, and they would bring the munitions in here on trains or on trucks, and they would carefully set them down inside one of these buildings right here and just go through them to make sure there were no issues with the munitions, that they were all as they should be. Once the munitions were declared safe, then they would bring them and store them in the magazines or the bunkers on base.
You think of the activity that was happening here for decades, right? Just probably constantly. Trains coming and going and loading on and off. And today, it's almost haunting how still and quiet it is with none of this activity. When did the trains leave here?
So the trains left in 2008. The Navy did a study, and between the cost of certifying rail for carrying munitions, and that which runs about $1 million a year to certify your rail to carry explosives, plus the fact that our locomotives were designed in the 1930s and built in the 1950s, so it was no longer cost effective to use trains, it was no longer environmentally sensible to use trains because of the amount of exhaust that they have. Suddenly trucks that were built in the 1990s or 2000s were far more environmentally sound than using trains, and it just became a more efficient way of doing business.
And you've been here for 30 some odd years almost,
I've been here
right?
since 1998. When I first got here, there were trains running all around the base. And no matter where you were on base, you'd always hear the horns, because just like out in the civilian world, when a train crosses a street, they've got to blow the horn. Mm-hmm. So you'd hear that happening all the time. And you would, depending on which way the wind was blowing, you could hear the trains moving around the base pretty constantly. So,
and presumably neighbors at Huntington Beach and Seal Beach would have heard that as well, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And we would occasionally get complaints, because people heard those at times when they might not have wanted to hear a train. But of course, once we got rid of the train system, then I would get complaints for the people that missed the train noises. The segregation yard here just started being used less and less as time went on. Starting in the 1970s, actually starting in the 1960s, the Navy was working on insensitive munitions, munitions that are not dangerous to handle, munitions that you could drop and they wouldn't explode. It was not the case during World War II, which is why you needed this structure protected by a berm in order to ensure that the rest of the base was safe as they were going through these munitions.
That's why we're surrounded by berms here.
That's right.
Do people ever want to shoot movies back here? I mean, visually, it really is a very arresting place.
It really is. It's very unique, and we actually have had a couple of movie scouts come here and have a look at the place, but just logistically, it never worked out.
What do you think is going to happen to these buildings then? They're not being used.
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, the Navy currently does not have any use for them. The Navy doesn't like getting rid of structures. There may be some use that they can come up with later.
Look, I could linger up here all day, shoot photos, and just sort of enjoy the views from up here, but you've got other things you want to show us, Greg. Where are we up to next?
Yeah, definitely. So our next stop is going to be what we call a research test and evaluation area, which is where they built part of the Saturn V moon rocket.
Let's go.
South of what is now an RV area, it's a tunnel that goes underneath Seal Beach Boulevard to what was the Boeing facility.
So there's a tunnel under Seal Beach Boulevard, like today?
Yeah, a big tunnel. It's like being in the Lost series, This was when they produced a stage of the Saturn rocket at Seal Beach and transported it out.
Greg, it's not really hidden history here, it's lost history. Tell me why we were standing in this vast open area.
This is the place where they built the second stage of the Saturn V moon rocket that took Americans to the moon in the 1960s and early 1970s.
Right here.
Right here. The old-time residents will remember there were these huge gray buildings.
Yeah.
The smallest.
Still not that long ago.
Not that long ago, no. About maybe 7 or 8 years ago is when the buildings finally came down. In the 1960s, the folks across the street who are now Boeing, used to be North American Aviation, was the name of the company. And they got the contract for the second stage of the Saturn V moon rocket. This was, of course, we were in a space race with the Soviets at the time. They were worried about industrial espionage. So they look across the Seal Beach Boulevard and they say, hey, there's this great big, very secure Navy installation right across the street from us. Why don't we lease some land from them and build the rocket over there?
That really is significant history.
It sure is.
It really is, and I don't know if there's any plans here. I assume the property is just going to remain open like this, right?
Right now, there's no plans to build anything on the property, but the Navy wants to keep this land set aside in case there is a future purpose that they can put it to use for.
Right.
A lot of times when you see undeveloped land on Navy property, it doesn't mean that it doesn't serve a purpose. Especially on a place where you store munitions, you need to have buffer zones.
But it really is something to stand here to think about what took place here, how it affected history. Where are we off to next, Greg?
Next, we are going to go and check out our parade ground and give a little more background information about the installation.
All right. Greg, I guess because not many people are allowed on the base, it's all kind of hidden history. I mean, Seal Beach Boulevard is right out there.
Right.
I've driven it 1,000 times. I never noticed these. Talk to us about what's right behind us.
Okay, so this is what's referred to as our parade ground. And like most parade grounds, they have some sort of weaponry on display on military bases. These are two 3-inch 50 caliber anti-aircraft guns that were pulled off of some auxiliary ships probably sometime in the 1950s or early 1960s.
Wow. So
these actually, served the purpose. They may have actually been fired, in a war, and now they sit here kind of as a memorial to sailors past and Navy missions passed.
These are the parade grounds where we are. How often is this used for that kind of purpose? I would think not that much anymore.
No, that's correct. We use them for our change of command ceremonies, which generally take place once every 2 or 3 years. Sometimes we'll get some sailors or Marines who will use this as like an exercise area. But the days of having parades on your military base just to have a parade have kind of gone by the wayside.
I tell you, the Naval Weapons Station here in Seal Beach, right against Huntington Beach, it really, to me, is such a fascinating, really mythical kind of place.
This was a hunting area, and I don't know how the foxes came to be here. So the decision was made to remove the red foxes, to capture them. But in California, a red fox may only be relocated within California, and only like on a golf course or a cemetery, etc. Of course, you don't want to kill the darling thing. So they had come through and they thought they had gotten rid of all the red foxes. And the XO and I would do what they would call a zone inspection. And we either would walk the entire perimeter of the base or drive around the entire perimeter looking for issues. So we're walking along, and trotting next to us is a little red fox. And we both just cracked up because he wasn't supposed to be there. And we both looked at each other. Did you see anything? No, I didn't see anything.
I got to tell you, for so many of us in Huntington Beach that have flown over and driven by the Naval Weapons Station here, to be able to get some access and learn some hidden history today has been a real thrill. I won't look at it the same way again. I'm sure our audience won't either. So thank you very much, Greg, for you and your team allowing us access, your knowledge. You've been here a long time. You're the historian here. So without you, these stories wouldn't be shared the way they are. So thank you very much.
Oh, our pleasure.
I think season 4 of Hidden Huntington Beach may have been my favorite, perhaps because of the unexpected surprises along the way. That hidden painting on a historic fire truck, seashells in a tree stump that seemed to reveal Native American culture, and so much more. If I've learned anything from doing this show, it's that you never know where it's going to take you. That's why I'm so looking forward to season 5. We now know that there are surprises out there that we'll either stumble upon accidentally or, through the kindness of our audience, be led to. Either way, we're so looking forward to what hidden history is out there on the horizon. See you soon.
I think it's a Southern California thing in a lot of ways, where you've got this clash of all these different eras, oil, military, and each one brings with it its own special historic record. And for whatever reason, in California, you have a lot of these situations where everybody works together really well and helps preserve things and helps tell the story and document it. So we were lucky today. We actually got to live it in a lot of ways, to walk through the history here at the military base. But yeah, it's a unique space.